Hi, this is our first lecture of the cardiovascular system, and we're going to start by talking about the general concept of a circulatory system, how it works, what different kinds of circulatory systems there can be, and why ours is arranged the way it is. The first question we really have to ask is this: how do our cells get their nutrients and get rid of wastes? Okay, so let's imagine we start with a single cell. That cell is going to be surrounded by water. That water will have nutrients in it, which the cell can take in. And it's a place where the cell can get rid of wastes. So this is, for example, a single-celled organism in some sort of pond or something. And that works very well for a single cell, but when we get a more complex organism, things are going to get more difficult. So if, for example, we imagine adding more cells to this organism, here you can see that we're going to run into a problem in a moment here. This cell now has only one place where it can exchange materials with the world around it, so we can't block that off. We're going to need to, as we add more cells to this organism, leave some channels through the organism so that each cell still has the ability to exchange materials with the outside world. So in this one, each cell still has a border where it can get nutrients in from the world around it and get rid of wastes. We leave sort of channels through the body. Keep that in mind. Now, if we imagine this organism now evolving so that it's going to move out of a watery environment up onto dry land, if we did that just as it is, all of the fluid would simply just drain away out of this organism, all the cells would dry up. So in order to move onto dry land, we're going to need to encase this in some sort of watertight barrier. That's going to keep this fluid inside. Now, the general term for that would be extracellular fluid. Let me label that here. Or interstitial fluid. We often abbreviate this ECF. Now, in a moment I'm going to give you a different name for how this might work in some organisms, so just hold that thought on that one. So these cells are now getting their nutrients from the extracellular fluid and getting rid of their wastes into the extracellular fluid. So the job of the organism as a whole, this whole structure, is going to be to maintain this ECF so that our cells can get what they need from their ECF, which means we're going to need some sort of exchange organ here on the surface that we can use to get rid of wastes coming out into the outside world and bringing in nutrients. So in this slightly more complicated organism now, we have a two-stage exchange system. We're going to bring nutrients from the outside world into the ECF, and then from the ECF into the cells, and wastes from the cells to the ECF, and then from the ECF out to the outside world. So there are organisms right now that use a system sort of like this. We might call this an open circulatory system. And in a system like this, we don't really have any difference. We don't have a different fluid called blood from ECF. Instead, this fluid, extracellular fluid, is serving the job of both blood and ECF, and we often call it hemolymph. So arthropods, for example, often use an open circulatory system like this, in which the cells and organs of the body are directly bathed in this hemolymph, which is then exchanging materials with the outside world. In many cases, they'll have some sort of heart, which brings in the hemolymph in one area and then pumps it out into the general body cavity, where it's then going to bathe all of the organs and cells. Now, this works well for small organisms, and especially when you're just distributing nutrients. But for larger organisms, and especially ones where you need to move gases around effectively in the body, this is not enough. Instead, organisms like that, and we are an example of this, use something different called a closed circulatory system. All right, so now let's look at the idea of a closed circulatory system. We're going to start with a set of body cells. In this environment, the body cells are still in extracellular fluid. The cells are still getting their nutrients. We'll do nutrients in green from the ECF, and getting rid of wastes. Let's do wastes in orange to make it a little more distinct. So bringing in nutrients from the ECF and getting rid of wastes. In a closed circulatory system, though, rather than that ECF communicating directly with the outside world, instead, we're going to have a system of closed vessels carrying a special circulatory fluid called blood. That blood circulates in these closed vessels. Now, the blood is going to exchange with the ECF at special tiny vessels called capillaries. So let's label this one a capillary. And we can show nutrients moving to the ECF from the blood at the capillary, and wastes moving from the ECF to the capillary. Then, this organism is going to have some sort of specialized exchange organs that exchange materials between the blood and the outside world. So we're going to have something now that can bring in nutrients from the outside world into the blood, and getting rid of wastes from the blood to the outside world. So now we kind of have a three-stage exchange system. We have, from the outside world to the blood, nutrients coming in, wastes going out. The blood circulates, then the blood exchanges with the ECF at capillaries. Nutrients from blood to ECF, and wastes from ECF to blood. And then from the ECF, nutrients go to the cells, and wastes go from the cells to the ECF. So it's a slightly different exchange system than for an open circulatory system. So now let's set this up as a model we can use for the human body. So we'll represent the body as this large rectangle. And we'll arrange the circulatory system as this closed loop of blood vessels. Like so. Let's put the body cells over here. This will just represent the cells of the body in general. This is not meant to be anatomically accurate. And we'll label the ECF around them. Okay. And let's just note our cells are getting nutrients here in green from the ECF, getting rid of wastes in orange. Let's also now include a couple of other things. We specifically want to call out oxygen in blue, O2, and we'll put in carbon dioxide in, oh, let's see what will show up well here. I wonder if gray will be visible. Let's try gray. It's okay. So carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is really just another kind of waste, but I'm calling out the gases specifically because we're going to need to pay a little bit of close attention to those. So now we can also here draw the exchange between capillaries exchanging materials with nutrients going from the blood to the ECF, and oxygen going from the blood to the ECF, wastes going from the ECF to the blood, including carbon dioxide going from the ECF to the blood. Alrighty, now, we're also now going to need a way to get these gases, oxygen and CO2, from the blood, between the blood and the outside world. So we're going to need to include an exchange organ. Let's see, let's call it the lungs. Make sure everyone can see that. The lungs are going to be good for bringing oxygen from the outside world into the blood, and carbon dioxide from the blood to the outside world. The lungs are specialized for gas exchange. And then we're also going to need some organs to get nutrients into the blood. Let's call that here, we'll call that the digestive system. Primarily, the digestive system is going to be about bringing nutrients into the blood. And we're also going to need some system for getting wastes between the blood and the outside world. We'll call that the urinary system. Primary job of the urinary system is to get wastes from the blood to the outside world. So, finally, we're going to need some way of pushing the blood around. One of the issues with the closed circulatory system is that you need a fair amount of pressure to push this special blood around. So let's include a pump here. That pump is going to be for pushing blood this way toward the lungs. And we'll include another pump here. Humans actually have two pumps. This one is for pushing blood through this side of the system, around most of the body cells and around the digestive and urinary exchange areas. And to make this more efficient, we'll kind of tie these two pumps together into a heart. So the heart is going to contain a pump to push blood this way through the lungs and this way through the rest of the body. We call this side the pulmonary circulation and this side the systemic circulation. And there you have a schematic model of the human cardiovascular system. So in this unit of the class, we're going to start by talking about blood, this circulating fluid, what's in the blood and how it works. Then we'll get into the heart, talk about how it works, aspects of how it applies pressure and how the blood vessels work, and how our body monitors and maintains all of this. So in this particular lecture, when we're talking about blood, we're going to be talking about the components of blood, what's in blood plasma, and then the specifics about the formed elements, the erythrocytes, or red blood cells, leukocytes, or white blood cells, and thrombocytes, or platelets. And then for the next few systems of the body, after we're done with the cardiovascular system, we're going to see them in this context. So how the respiratory system, the lungs, how the urinary system and digestive system all involve exchange between the blood and the outside world.